The bracket is out and the debate is on. You already know who's in and who's out, but our experts tell you the snubs, the surprises, and the potential for future chaos. Plus, the latest news, breakdowns ahead of the biggest games this weekend, and tons of player spotlights, future and present. It's all coming up on the 247 Sports College Football Show. Hello and welcome to the 247 Sports College Football Show. I'm Cooper Patagna, and we have a loaded show for you this Friday, kicking it off with some news around the country, and nowhere better to start than in Gainesville, Florida, as the University of Florida Athletic Director Scott Strickland announced Thursday that Billy Napier will remain the head coach of the Gators. This announcement comes during the speculation that Napier was on the hot seat amidst a 4-4 season so far. And with that, we bring in national college football analyst John Talty for more on the situation. John, welcome. Good to see you, my friend. It seems like every week we're talking about Billy Napier in the Florida Gators. What more can you tell us about this announcement from Scott Strickland?
Yeah, well, finally we have some clarity here, right? We've been kind of doing the weekly Napier updates and like what might help him, what might not. And now we know, to this point at least, that he's coming back for 2025. And I think there's a couple of reasons why that's the case. I think first and foremost, they've played better, especially in recent weeks. Looked like it was going to get pretty ugly. I'm talking to people around college football. This is a team that is playing hard. They clearly have not quit on Billy Napier. People have noticed some different adjustments that they've made, especially on the defensive side of things. And they gave Tennessee all they could handle. DJ Lagway doesn't get hurt. I mean, they were right there with Georgia, beat Kentucky. This is a team that is not maybe meeting the lofty expectations that Florida fans have for the program, but is clearly trending upward under Billy Napier, just in terms of the last few weeks. I think the other key thing to remember is, not only was it going to cost a lot of money to get rid of Billy Napier, but there were less and less obvious names to feel like you could turn to that were going to fire up the fan base. There's just not a lot of obvious guys that are slam dunks right now. Lane Kiffin's name has been mentioned. James Franklin's name has been mentioned. We've heard some other names, but there was no one that felt like was going to be guaranteed to be available, guaranteed to, say yes to the job, and guaranteed to really fire up the base. So I think that, coupled with some other things, that you could feel good about with Billy Napier, led to them deciding to, punt the decision down the road for at least a year, see what they can do around DJ Lagway, and trying to give Billy Napier a chance to finish strong on the recruiting trail. They've really struggled with this hanging over his head. Now with some clarity, can you try to bump up the recruiting class that's currently ranked, number 51 in college football?
Another SEC program in the headlines this week as Steve Sarkisian announced that Texas receiver, former four-star Jonte Cook, is no longer with the program, the number 38 ranked player in the class of 2023. What more can you tell us about that departure?
Well, Coop, I think I saw your tweet about, there's going to be interest in this guy, right? He was a highly regarded recruit. I've already heard from different people, in the industry that, there is interest, regardless of what happened at Texas. There is interest in this guy. There are people that he believe that he could be a real immediate, contribution to their team. There's a combination of factors here. They've kept it pretty quiet. I mean, we know, I think Steve Sarkisian said this publicly, a mutual parting of ways. I think that's a little more sided toward Texas, but certainly, Cook was frustrated, from my understanding, by his diminishing role. It was a bigger part of the offense in the early part of the season. Then you get to the Texas game and he doesn't get a single snap. Now, there's some, he was banged up, some other things that were happening there. But he saw his role diminish. There's other guys that have stepped up. That's a talented wide receiver room. And I think, the important thing if you're Steve Sarkisian and that a guy is potentially hitting the portal, as he indicated to Steve Sarkisian, you really got to protect your culture and protect that locker room when you have a season that could end in a national championship. You don't want a disgruntled guy in the room who's possibly poisoning the well. And, I had a story yesterday about Curt Cignetti's time at Alabama and managing the wide receiver room. And that's such a complicated thing that I think fans don't even understand. There's ego, there's alphas. These guys are used to being the top dog. And it's really delicate to try to keep everybody pulling the same direction, even if maybe they're not getting enough targets or snaps. And so if you feel like you're starting to lose that, or you have a guy in there who might disrupt that room, sometimes it's best just to kind of go your separate way. And of course, Texas having all the talent that they do at the wide receiver position makes that even easier to go ahead and do.
We got a couple big matchups in the SEC as number 16 Ole Miss hosts number 3 Georgia. You think about Ole Miss right now on the outside looking in when it comes to the college football playoff race. How much pressure is on Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin to kind of come out on the other side and beat Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs?
Considerable. I mean, this is, I think, what their entire plan was built toward, right? They get blown out. I think it was 52-17 last year to Georgia, and they looked internally, thought about how do we get to a level where we can beat a team like Georgia, and I think they went very aggressive. They were the top team in the transfer portal rankings that got guys like Walter Nolan to be able to win games like Georgia. I mean, to me, this is the team. Maybe more so than any other in college football that was all in on this year in terms of being aggressive with NIL, being aggressive with the transfer portal. They felt like having guys like Jackson Dart coming back, that they could really kind of level up, add in all the necessary pieces that they could possibly get to try to make a run. And they're in a position now where they have to win. That Kentucky loss in particular has put them in a precarious situation in terms of meeting those preseason playoff goals. And so they have to beat Georgia at this point, which is, it's tricky. It's going to be, in the Grove. I'll be there. I know the Grove will be rocking ahead of time. It will be a fun, loud environment, but you've got to find a way to, get out and stop a Georgia team that we're seeing that sets some ups and downs. It is beatable, but when we've seen them at full power, that's a very challenging team. And another one that certainly wants to and expects to be in the playoff. And, Georgia really can't afford too many losses at this point either.
Another big matchup in the SEC taking place this weekend is number 11 Alabama. They'll travel to Baton Rouge, and they got a night game with LSU. Alabama in a pretty interesting spot, unfamiliar territory with already 2 losses. What concerns do you have about this team going into that matchup with LSU?
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious, but it's the road games. This team kind of reminds me in some ways to that 2022 team that ended up losing in LSU, which ended their playoff chances. But you just see them make more uncharacteristic mistakes on the road. It's something that Nick Saban struggled with a little bit in his last years with that team. And from talking to different people around college football, I think it's something that Kalen DeBoer, I don't want to say it's a full-on struggle, but it's something that it's hard to regulate emotions. It's hard to regulate coming out with the right amount of intensity, but not burning too much energy too early on. I think Nick Saban was the master in many ways at that. And I think you've seen, if you go back, especially a year ago at Washington, DeBoer's teams come out very hot, and then they kind of have to hold on and just try to survive at the end. And that win this year against Georgia, great example of that. They came out better than I ever could have imagined them against Georgia, and they have to just hold on and pray at the end to try to win. This is going to be a very difficult environment. Coop, you know it well. Baton Rouge at night, best environment, I think, in college football. It's going to be challenging. Kalen DeBoer has never experienced anything like what he is going to see in Saturday when Baton Rouge LSU fans have been drinking and eating all day, ready to let it loose. Evidently, they're bringing a tiger into the mix. It's going to be a crazy environment. And how do you as a coach, not only for yourself, but for your team, make sure that you don't come out too tight, you don't come out too energized, that you can truly play 4 quarters of football? We've seen this Alabama team under Kalen DeBoer struggle a little bit with that, especially on the road in losses to Vanderbilt and Tennessee. This is a major test for them. And if they lose, they're out of the playoff race. And that's going to be a pretty disappointing result, especially for Alabama fans in year 1 of the Kalen DeBoer era in Tuscaloosa.
John, appreciate it. As always, have fun this weekend, man. Guys, remember you can check out more of John's work in his latest book entitled The Price, What It Takes to Win in College Football's Era of Chaos. If you want insight on this crazy college football landscape, this book is for you, and purchase it wherever you find your reading material. Undefeated Indiana will host the CBS Big Game of the Week as Michigan comes to town. We'll check in on that matchup a little later, but first, Emily Proud and Brad Crawford break down the first college football playoff bracket and the impact of this week's slate will have.
Here she is, the first college football playoff bracket. We've got Oregon, Georgia, Miami, and BYU, the top 4 seeds. I will say, though, the Cougars, they're in as the Big 12 champ, but they're actually ranked number 9. We'll discuss. After that, the number 5 seed is Ohio State, followed by Texas, Penn State, Tennessee, Indiana, Notre Dame, Alabama, and Boise State out of the group of 5. Let's welcome in our friend Brad Brackett's here, and it's not your bracket this time, so we can, insult it as much as we want. We can dig deeper into it and see what we like, what we don't like, and all fair game here. So you did not make this one, but what is your biggest takeaway from this reveal?
Yeah, shockingly, the committee picked the same 12 teams that I have in my final projection a month from now in their first rankings. However, the seeding's very different. BYU is a big takeaway for me. I thought BYU would be a potential top 4 or top 5 seed. To have the Cougars at 9 shows me that strength of schedule, Emily, which is usually a primary factor in the committee's rankings, they just overlooked BYU. BYU beat SMU on the road. SMU right now is the second best team in the ACC. It's a quality non-conference win. Kansas State's another ranked team that BYU beat by 31 points. BYU has 2 wins right now over teams that the committee has in its top 25. And there's some teams like Texas that has 0. Miami, 0. So very interesting to me.
Yeah, you're seeing strength of schedule matter for teams like an Indiana or an Army all the way down at 25, but it seems like it doesn't matter as much for a BYU who, like you said, has 2 ranked wins, which is more than 4 teams ahead of it. By the way, those 4 teams all have a loss, which BYU doesn't have. So, Brad, I'm sure there's a more eloquent way of asking this question, but why does the committee hate the Big 12?
That's a very good question. And I think this shows us, BYU at 9, that there's no margin for error for the Cougars. So they're going to have to win the Big 12 in order to get that automatic spot. Iowa State is nowhere to be found in the top 12. That is good news, however, for maybe an at-large 3rd or 4th team from the SEC or Big 10, or maybe even an Army. What if Boise State wins the Mountain West, gets that G5 spot, and yet Army's 13-0? Certainly Army would make it over a maybe 2-loss Iowa State team. So BYU at 9 shows me that the committee right now does not respect the Big 12.
And Iowa State down at number 17. So if we're looking at this disrespect for the Big 12, and it looks like BYU doesn't have a whole lot of wiggle room in terms of losing, but of course there's still that automatic in if they do win the Big 12 championship. But my question for you is, what's Boise State thinking right now about the potential to jump them and get into that number 4 spot and get a bye, knowing that we're working with a number 9 and a number 12, which is awfully close?
It's certainly a possibility, especially if BYU does not win the Big 12 at 13-0. If BYU trips up these next couple of weeks, one of these last regular season games, but still beats maybe an Iowa State, K-State, or a Colorado in the Big 12 championship game, BYU is in. However, guaranteed top 4 seed, I don't think so, not at number 9 right now. Boise State's schedule right now looking pretty good. They beat Washington State. Washington State 7-1. They're ranked inside the top 20, it is. They beat UNLV on the road. And that loss, it's still a loss, but a quality loss. Losing at Oregon by 3 points. I mean, Oregon's 9-0. They're runaway favorite as the unanimous number 1 team. So Boise State's resume right now to be a G5 program is pretty darn good.
And they do have that win over number 21, Washington State, as well. So they have a ranked win in this bracket so far. All right, I know that you said that your bracket perfectly mirrors this one, so this is going to be maybe a challenging question for you. But if you had to guess, who do you think is on the outside now that will be in the final one?
I think SMU has a great opportunity, Emily, and part of it is because Miami is at number 4 right now, one of those top unbeatens. That shows me that there's already built-in room for Miami to potentially lose a game and still make it as an at-large team. If SMU beats Miami and Charlotte in the ACC championship game here in a few weeks, SMU's in. Maybe not a guaranteed top 4 seed, but they're in as a conference champion. And you got to put Miami in at 12-1, right, despite not a ton of quality wins. So SMU's a team, I think, right now at number 13, still in pretty good shape to make the playoff if one of those teams, maybe in Alabama, maybe a Tennessee, Notre Dame, one of those teams ahead of them loses.
It's like what we talk about in March, these bid thieves. There's still, of course, a chance for somebody random that we were not expecting to win a conference championship, because that is just one game on the calendar. How about the opposite? Who's in right now that you think could potentially end up out?
Alabama has been shown too much love of the committee, and we talked, Emily, back in the summertime. I did not have Alabama in my projected 12-team playoff. I do right now because Bama, I think, can beat LSU this weekend, but that is a playoff elimination game. It's a huge game. Bama's one of several two-loss SEC teams inside that top 15 at number 11 right now. But the quality wins for Bama. I mean, they lost at Tennessee, lost at Vanderbilt. They're still hanging on to that Georgia win, and we know how much the committee loves Georgia, having them at number 3 right now behind Oregon and Ohio State. So I think Kalen DeBoer, however, the first-year coach at Bama, he knows that the Crimson Tide have to win out. A 9-3 Bama team is not going to cut it, and that starts by winning Saturday night in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, well, we're talking about that game. Of course, the game of consequence between number 11 Alabama and number 15 LSU. And you mentioned the implications for Alabama. Just overall, I'm already hearing the playoff eliminator talk with this one. What's your take on the stakes in this game?
Yeah, the stakes are huge, and I think it comes down to which quarterback do you trust. Are we going to see the Garrett Nussmeier that threw 3 interceptions in the second half during that loss at A&M? Or are we going to see the one that helped LSU come back and beat Notre Dame at home a few weeks ago? You look at the other sideline, Jalen Milroe. Both of his losses, I've already mentioned, have come on the road. Milroe threw a pick-6 in Nashville against the Commodores and did not play well against Tennessee in that hostile environment at Neyland Stadium. So, I mean, I think odds makers right now have this game a little bit wrong. Bama as a small favorite. I think LSU, the home team in this series, by the way, Emily, has won 3 consecutive years. LSU beat Bama on that 2-point conversion a couple of years ago, Brian Kelly's first season there. So huge game Saturday night in the SEC. And obviously, I think the loser of this game is on the outside looking in for the playoff.
I'd say there's a bit of a home field advantage, Death Valley at night, certainly in this game. But yes, this one will certainly matter when it comes to the next iteration of the playoff bracket. So will this one, number 3 Georgia and number 16 Ole Miss. The Dogs can likely afford another loss for their playoff chances. I don't know about their SEC championship chances, but what do you think about the Rebels?
This game certainly means more to Ole Miss than it does Georgia. And I hate to say that because Kirby Smart's going to try to win as many games as he can, obviously, before getting to Atlanta. But Ole Miss already has a loss to Kentucky this season. That was not a good look. Kentucky's not ranked right now in the top 25. And the Rebels need a very good win, which this would constitute as that, if they can beat Georgia. But I sort of want to see which Carson Beck shows up. I mean, Georgia beat Texas a few weeks ago on the road. That's the Bulldogs' best win. But Carson Beck was bad in that game. 3 interceptions. He threw 3 picks again in the cocktail party last weekend against Florida. Georgia lucky to win that game. So Georgia is leaking oil right now, I think. And I'm not sure if right now is the SEC favorite anymore. They can go a long way in showing that they are, however, if they can win in Oxford.
Thank you, Emily and Brad. Be sure to keep it locked into 247sports.com all season long for continued coverage on the playoffs as we head down the home stretch of the regular season. Undefeated Indiana will host the CBS big game of the week as Michigan comes to town. We'll check in on that matchup a little later, but first, and we'll be back right after this. It's time to call your shot, and who better to call than our resident doctor, Smoke FD. That means football doctor Smoke Dixon joins me as we look at a few of the biggest matchups this weekend as Smoke calls his shot. Who will make the biggest impact this week in college football? Smoke Dixon, good to see you, my man. We got Alabama, LSU at night in Death Valley. Smoke, you're an Alabama Crimson Tide alum. I'm an LSU alum. Let's start with Alabama. Who's making the biggest impact this weekend?
Cool. We're going to have to start off with Jam Miller. Everyone's been saying, Bama, run the ball. Well, if you want to run the ball in inclement weather, put the ball in Jam's stomach, let him go. This is a classic one-cut runner that's averaging 6.1 yards per carry. He's a real running back there in the backfield that can give you explosive plays, not only running the ball, but cool, when we see him get the ball thrown to him as a receiver, he scores. So in inclement weather, in Death Valley, as you know, that Tiger, they're bringing the live one back out. If you want the Tigers to go to sleep early in the first quarter, start running the ball with Jam Miller. One cut, make a guy miss, contact balance, score. Then when you get to the fourth quarter, when all the noise is said and everything is removed, and you want to get this game to the end, Put the ball in Jam Miller's stomach, junior out of Texas, 5'10", 218 pounds, compact runner with power, speed, the ability to make guys miss, contact balance, and the ability to score.
Smoke, this is considered a college football playoff elimination game. Both these teams have 2 losses. So if it's LSU who gets the win on Saturday night, who's going to be the guy that we look back on and say, well, you know what? He had to play an A-level game for LSU to beat the Tide.
Garrett Nussmeier. We've said it from the beginning. If the LSU's going to have a chance to get in the conversation with the playoffs, win the SEC, it's going to be solely dependent on the best quarterback. And I said it again. The best quarterback in the SEC, if we're talking about NFL potential, the ability to play in the pocket, make big throws. And I know everyone says, well, he's thrown 3 interceptions in game that they've lost last week, and, they're having a tough time. But when you are a good quarterback, Coop, and you know it, you have to put the ball in harm's way in order to create explosive plays. And on big third downs, time to get the ball into your playmaker's hands, you have to have that gunslinger type of attitude. And what he's doing is he's giving you a chance to win the game through the passing game. Because as of right now, you can't run the ball in an effective pace. So to get that crowd up, hype, and ready to go, we're going to have to see some explosive throws from Garrett Nussmeier, control the pocket, control the game, and get this game going for LSU. Garrett Nussmeier, my guy.
Smoke, Georgia, Kirby Smart, they're going to try to end some dreams. That's what they're all about. They're traveling to Oxford this weekend as they take on number 16 Ole Miss. They already have 2 losses as well. If they were able to do that, who's going to be a big reason why?
Well, say that again, Coop. If Georgia needs to win the game, who's going to have to be the guy? Well, it's real easy. You saw what happened in Texas. Michael Williams, he's back, and he's healthy. You have this young man that is the best defensive lineman in the country. He has the ability to affect the game in the run game by setting the edge with violence, shot, shed, locate, bend, close down the line of scrimmage and find the ball for tackles for loss. And when you talk about an elite pass rusher, cut the tape on against Texas. Texas has one of the best left tackles in the game, and he did not make him look that well. Great get off, the ability to bend, scoop, clean, close, burst. This guy's a total package, and now he's getting back healthy. My God, Jackson Dart, look out, because he's coming to close the game out.
Smoke, believe it or not, this is a point-of-attack game. With what Ole Miss has done in the trenches via the transfer portal, a lot of guys on that defensive side of the football, Ole Miss playing good ball on defense. On the other side, Georgia, Carson Beck has struggled, 3 interceptions. He's turned the ball over a lot. Who on that defensive side of the line of scrimmage for the Rebels needs to have a big game to get after Carson Beck?
Walter Big Game Nolan. Could we said it when he was in the transfer portal, the #1 defensive lineman, and arguably maybe the #1 defensive player. So when you go out there and you get Walter Nolan in your building, you make that great transaction, you only bring him here for this moment right now. You bring him here to shut down the middle of the defense in the run game, and he's done a tremendous job of that. And that's why you see Ole Miss tops in yards per rush against defensively, tackles for loss, and sacks. And now you're talking about a guy that can affect the game now as a pass rusher. Burst, get off, hand violence, swivel hips, can operate like, in that 2-yard box, 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and they have to now double team him. So when they double team him, everybody else has to eat, and the guys on the back end, the front end, back end Marys, pass rush, Walter Nolan, stop the get run game, Georgia doesn't have a chance. And I guess you understand, whenever Carson Beck gets pressure in his face, bad things happen.
Give defensive coordinator Pete Golding a lot of credit there at Ole Miss, what they've done on the defensive side of the line of scrimmage. Not just Walter Nolan, Smoke. You got guys like J.J. Pegues as well, Jared Ivey, a couple of names that come to mind. Let's go to the Big Ten. Let's talk about Penn State, because this is a bounce-back opportunity for James Franklin. Obviously, the things that have been written about him, can't get over the hump against Ohio State, can't get over the hump against Michigan. Well, they got a good opportunity against Washington this weekend, and I got a pretty good feeling who you're going to talk about here. But what is the prescription here for James Franklin and Penn State to get back on track and keep their college football playoff hopes alive?
Well, Coop, they've done a tremendous job of getting number 44, Tyler Warren, the ball. When you get Tyler Warren the ball in any way, form, a Wildcat quarterback, when you give him a short yardage. Find ways to just get this guy the ball, because when you do give him the ball, you score a bunch of points. And the last time we checked, they only lost one game. And I think this guy was on the witness protection program because we didn't see him. So in order to get this thing going again and get back into a winning column, find and have creative ways like you've done, Andy Kołnicki, of getting Tyler Warren the ball, but maybe do this a little bit earlier and more often in any way, form. One of the better tight ends in the country, the leading receiver on their team, and the most explosive player on their offense in any way, main way necessary. Get him the ball. Running it, throwing it, hand it to him. If it lines up at, we saw it against USC when he was the center on the fumble Ruski type play, shot play down the field, but you just got to get this guy the ball because he's a true playmaker on your offense.
Smoke, great to see you, man. As always, reminder, you can find Smoke Dixon on the 247 Sports YouTube channel, The Football Doctor. Smoke, see you soon, my man. Guys, like we've been saying, the slate this weekend is extremely impactful for the rest of the season. So up next, Emily Proud will check in with our team site experts to give you inside information on the biggest game in the Big Ten in the SEC.
Our CBS Sports Big Ten Game of the Week pits the defending national champs Michigan against the undefeated Indiana Hoosiers. Our team site reporters from 247 Sports give us a preview of what to expect in this big-time matchup.
One of the things I'll be watching for in this week's matchup between Indiana and Michigan is whether the Wolverines can finally cross that 30-point threshold. In last week's matchup with Oregon, run-pass balance was a big issue. 8 of the first 9 first downs were runs, but in the second half, that got much better. In the first drive of the third quarter, Michigan went on a 10-play, 75-yard march that ended in a touchdown, and it featured a lot of first down throws, downfield throws at that, and Davis Warren was near flawless. They did a good job of getting him comfortable with first down throwing. And so that's going to be a big key in this week's game, getting the quarterback comfortable. So if Michigan can channel that in this week's game and start the game against the Hoosiers the way they started the second half against the Ducks, they hope that will lead them to some more success and keep Davis Warren much more comfortable, because what we've seen is a Davis Warren who has not turned the football over since he's re-entered the starting lineup, and that too will be a big part of their success.
Well, for Indiana offensively, the offensive line has been great all year, but this is going to be a tough test. Michigan has a number of guys that are going to be NFL players, and the O-line's got to play well to protect Curtis Rourke and open up some holes in the run game. If they can protect Rourke, Michigan's beat up in the back end in their secondary. They got some injuries back there. The Hoosiers should have a good day throwing the ball. You also want to run the ball to keep some balance, keep Michigan honest. Defensively, Michigan's going to want to limit possessions, keep the score down. They can't get into a shootout with an Indiana team that's averaging just under 50 points a game. If Indiana can stop the run and get them in some second and long, third and long situations, Davis Warren could struggle. Indiana's leading the league in sacks and tackles for loss, so they've been creating a ton of havoc in the backfield. If they can do that again this week, they should be able to slow down and shut down a Michigan offense that's really struggled to move the ball at times this year and has been pretty inconsistent. On special teams, don't give up any big plays. That's how an underdog can stay in the game. Michigan's a 14-point underdog. If you can keep them from getting any big plays on special teams, they should come away with another win and get to 10-0.
It doesn't get any bigger than a top 15 showdown at night in Death Valley. It's Alabama and LSU. Our 247 Sports team site experts give us the keys to victory.
It's discipline. I mean, it comes down to going on the road, doing the right thing before the snap, doing the right thing after the snap, because both of those were issues for Alabama at Tennessee. They had 4 pre-snap penalties at Tennessee. They had the post-snap penalty against Kendrick Law at a pretty key moment late in that game where he lost his composure, and both of those cost them. So the ability to handle the crowd noise, the ability to handle the other team if they're trash talking or whatever the case may be, and just focus on the game itself and focus on executing and focus on getting the call at the line. Those are all pretty critical things for this Alabama team because they have not shown a consistent ability to do that this season. They're one of the most penalized teams in college football. They have tried very hard to kind of crack down on the discipline and try to get players to play a little bit tighter in games. And they did it to some extent against Missouri. But this is obviously going to be a much different test when you're going on the road in Death Valley.
Just, I think for us, Milroe, you got to be able to make him a passer, and I know he's got a couple of really explosive weapons in Ryan Williams and Bernard, but LSU's got to make sure that they kind of key in on the back half here to make sure that Milroe is more of a passer in this game. I think Zy Alexander, Ashton Stamps, the two cornerbacks are going to be huge in that effort. I know we talked about containing him and not allowing him to get some of those big runs, but the second part of that is if they are going to make him a passing quarterback, they've got to be able to hold up in the back end, and that's something that they're still learning, I think, a little bit here in this first year under Blake Baker. So LSU's been a lot more aggressive here on defense and just kind of being around the ball a little bit more, especially in the secondary. They've been a little bit more opportunistic. I'll steal Mike's word there in terms of LSU being able to kind of create some turnovers, create some havoc there in the backfield. So if they're able to do that, I like LSU's offense to be able to move the ball if they can eliminate some of those turnovers and get the run game a little bit more balanced with the pass. So I think for me, making sure that Milroe is or forcing Milroe to beat them with his arm, I think is probably the best path towards success for LSU this weekend.
Thanks to Emily and those guys for giving us insight on two big-time matchups this weekend. Be sure to check out unrivaled coverage on these team sites where these guys will have you covered all season long. The freshman class continues to tear up the world of college football, and up next, our national recruiting analyst Tom Loy joins us to preview the next crop of stars headed to the national stage. Welcome back to the 247 Sports College Football Show. I'm now joined by the resident insider, Tom Loy, as we're less than, 30 days until National Signing Day on December 4th. That means it's silly season, as our good friend Andrew Ivins always likes to talk about. Tom, one guy that's been in the news for quite some time and a guy that you have covered very diligently is four-star quarterback Julian Lewis, committed to USC, going back all the way to last year, but it's been Colorado, it's been Indiana. There's been a lot of news about a potential visit this weekend to Bloomington for CBS Big Ten Game of the Week against Michigan. Some news as of this morning doesn't sound like Julian Lewis will make it to campus. What can you tell us about the latest development?
Yeah, that trip's off. It was basically up in the air the entire time, all week long. And even talking to Matt Weaver over at our IU site, I mean, he was kind of with me, like, we don't know if it's going to happen. But Indiana expected him. They were hopeful, but obviously plans changed. At this point, I would say that this probably ends the recruitment between Indiana and Julian Lewis. So at that point, all signs point towards Colorado and obviously the committed school, USC. I think my best guess, I said this when I first started in this role, and it was me, Ivins, and Emily on the desk. I said, I'm going to call my shot and make it very clear. I do not expect Julian Lewis to end up at USC. Honestly, at this point, I still feel that way. It was, for a while, it was Auburn. Then it became Indiana. Now all signs point toward Colorado as the school that is most likely the team to beat, that's likely going to flip him. I feel like I could actually toss in a prediction for Colorado at this point. I'm not ready yet, but man, I'm really close.
So what about the potential ripple effects if Julian Lewis does decide to verbally commit to Colorado? We know Colorado is a late surging team under Deion Sanders. That's what we've seen over the last two cycles. Could you see Julian Lewis potentially having an impact on some other undecided recruits out there?
Absolutely. I mean, of all the schools, of all the coaches, we know that Deion Sanders is ready to make something happen late in the cycle. So I could absolutely see him flipping some receivers, whether it's tight end, offensive lineman. I mean, they're in it with Carday Smith, who's been committed to USC for a while. So there's a lot of schools that are going to be leery of their commitments if Julian Lewis does flip to Colorado, as I think could very well happen. USC, their class as a whole has been kind of falling apart. It's been tough to watch. I just tossed in a crystal ball pick for Shamar Arnaud, Julian's teammate, to flip to Auburn at this point. So and he's committed to USC. So a lot going on, but I do think that Julian Lewis could have a big positive impact. But let me flip something back to you real quick. Do you think Julian Lewis is the type of kid that could go to Colorado and compete for a starting job right away?
100%. I think that's why they're recruiting him, right? You're talking about one of the guys that is the most I would say effectively one of the most polished passers just in terms of what we've seen over the last 3 years at Carrollton High School. You talk about a guy that knows how to protect the football as well. Really clean TD to INT ratio. We talk about the processing power as well. So you're talking about Julian Lewis going to a system where Colorado has definitely reinforced their offensive line, playing under Pat Shurmur, NFL type of system. Shador, more than likely going to be a top 10 pick, probably a top 5 pick. So I think Julian Lewis makes a ton of sense here. Let's talk about the Big Ten. We talked about Indiana a little bit, and we talked about them hosting the Big Ten game of the week. They have Michigan. Michigan's in a pretty interesting spot here, now in the top 15 of the recruiting rankings, making some noise here down the stretch. But one of those guys that they're trying to hold on to is 4-star defensive back Ivan Taylor out of Florida. It seems like Alabama has kind of been chipping away at this one. What can you tell us about that?
I don't really love Michigan's chances to keep Ivan Taylor in the class. Now, it's been going back and forth. There's been a lot of guys that Michigan's been recruiting, and it's like the fact that they're recruiting defensive backs makes it very clear that they're okay with their current class. And if they happen to lose Ivan Taylor, obviously you don't want to lose him because he's an elite talent, but they're setting themselves up to be comfortable losing him if he happens to depart from the class. So my best guess at this point, in talking to people at Michigan and talking to people at Alabama, I would lean toward the Crimson Tide eventually getting him in the class. The family loves Alabama. They're very high on the potential of what he could do in a Crimson Tide uniform. So at this point, I think Alabama fans need to start getting excited about this kid that Andrew Ivins, our director of scouting, very, very high on. I like Ivan to Alabama.
All right, we'd be remiss if we're talking about Michigan and we didn't talk about Bryce Underwood here, currently committed to LSU. I believe will be in Baton Rouge this weekend for the LSU-Alabama game at night. You never know what that game can do. Has been committed to LSU, Joe Sloan, Brian Kelly, for quite some time. What can you tell us just in terms of how you feel this recruitment is going?
This is a massive visit. I mean, he's obviously been flirting with Michigan for a while. Jim Harbaugh's departure, Sharon Moore's arrival, that's the reason that Michigan's back in play here. But this weekend is huge for LSU. They need to get it done and shut it down completely. He's been flirting with and talking to Michigan for such a long time over the last couple of weeks, especially potential visits were discussed. Eric Meadows got on campus. They had talked going to Michigan together, and then Bryce didn't show up. So LSU needs to get this one done. Again, though, Michigan, there's some confidence coming out of Ann Arbor that they can get this one done. And I'm not ruling them out. I mean, I think if you're looking for a massive splash, do not rule out Bryce Underwood flipping late in the process, potentially even on signing down December 4th.
All right, let's talk about Alabama a little bit. We talked about them and their chances with top 247 DB Ivan Taylor. There's another guy in their class, though, they're playing a little bit of defense with, right? Anthony Rogers out there at Montgomery, Carver High School, played well as a senior, but it seems like Ohio State is working their way into this one.
Yeah, Turbo can fly. I mean, this would be a massive pickup for another program. There's two ones that I'm watching. You got Ohio State that's got him on campus this weekend. Georgia's also in play at this point, and I made this very clear at 247sports.com this week. I do not expect him to stick with Alabama. Alabama doesn't expect him to stick in the class. So all signs point toward the Buckeyes right now being the team to beat. Do not sleep on the Bulldogs. And I think, again, he's small. Like standing next to Anthony Rogers, I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I can assure you he and I are almost eye level, but he is much faster than I am. So I think this would be a tremendous pickup for Ohio State. He can fly. He could be a return specialist. It would be a nice pickup for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, what's fascinating about him, what you've seen as a senior, is a guy that has showed his multi-dimensional skill set. You see a lot of his value as a receiver split out of the backfield, but they also play him in the slot a little bit. You talked about the return game. A guy that would fit in well, whether it was in Tuscaloosa or Columbus. Let's talk about Notre Dame, a team that you are quite familiar with. They're hosting Florida State, and it seems like Notre Dame is really starting to gear up here with less than 30 days until National Signing Day. And let's talk about four guys that are coming to campus, but I want to start defensively with two linebackers. You got Madden Faremo, a guy that surged up our board inside the top 100. Another guy kind of going the other way, and a lot of it's had to do with an injury, but still a very, very talented player in his own right, in Nathaniel Owusu-Boateng. Yep. These guys kind of fit the idea of who Notre Dame, who Marcus Freeman is. How do you feel about Notre Dame's chances potentially being able to get these two done?
There was a point where I felt that Notre Dame was going to land both of them. I do not really feel that way anymore. But if you look at the rankings, I feel better about Notre Dame landing the better of the two according to the rankings. And I feel like that's Madden Faremo. I think that Notre Dame gets that one done. Now, there's some stiff competition. He's still talking about taking a USC trip late in the process. Texas is involved, Washington as well. But I think the Fighting Irish can get that one done. There are some ties. He's got some friends on the team. He's enjoyed every visit he's taken to South Bend, and I think Marcus Freeman, Al Golden, and those guys get that one done. Now, with Nathaniel Usu-Boateng, despite the fact that his brother Jeremiah played for Notre Dame, and he's obviously in the NFL right now, I do not expect Notre Dame to get that one done. Something's going to have to change this weekend if they're going to eventually land Boateng. So the team to beat, in my opinion, is Michigan. I think the Wolverines have done a phenomenal job with him and his recruitment throughout the entire process. He feels at home in Ann Arbor, loves the school, loves the program, loves the coaching staff, and I think they kind of split. Notre Dame gets one, Michigan gets the other.
Nonetheless, we've seen an uptick from Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden, who you talk about a lot there in South Bend, overseeing the front office part of that organization. Matt Faramo, just in terms of a guy that you would compare him to a little bit, reminds me a little bit of another guy from California last cycle, Kingston Viliamu-Asa. I think this guy's going to be able to play early. I love Matt Faramo. Trying to get him at the All-American Bowl. Hopefully that happens. Hopefully he can have a big week in San Antonio. Let's keep it locked here with Notre Dame, and let's talk offensively, right? Because this is where I think the question mark is when you talk about Notre Dame. What do they look like at the skill position, receivers specifically? But there's another guy in that tight end room currently committed to Michigan, Andrew Olesh, they'd like to add. They're working on Derek Meadows, currently committed to LSU. What can you tell us about Marcus Freeman, what they're trying to do on the offensive side of the football?
I think there's 3 teams, technically 4, that you can watch for Olesh, one of the top tight ends in the country. Oregon's in it. I don't think they're going to get that one done. I think they're going to, they're focusing on Lincoln Cure and a couple other guys. But I think that Notre Dame is probably in the 2nd spot right now, and that's without even having him on campus. So Michigan leads. Obviously, that's where he's committed. I don't think the Penn State visit really set the world on fire last week. So the door is open for the Fighting Irish. If they can land him and pair him with James Flanagan, I don't think there'd be a better combination at the tight end position in the country, according to probably you or Andrew Ivins. I think you guys both love each of these guys, and I think that would be massive. So if you can get him, I think that would be a huge get for Notre Dame. And then also Derek Meadows is coming to town. Top 247, used to be kind of right on that 5-star cusp. Hasn't really set the world on fire as a senior, but again, top target for Notre Dame. The guy, his potential is through the roof. Mike Brown, Mike Denbrock recruiting him extremely hard. This is the guy they want. We keep talking about Notre Dame taking that next step as a class. You need to land these 4 guys, or at least 3 of them, if you're trying to take that step. So Mike Brown, Mike Denbrock, like I said, recruiting Derek Meadows really hard. He's committed to LSU. For him, behind the scenes, if he goes to Michigan, I think the only way he ends up in Ann Arbor is if Bryce Underwood flips. So that really opens the door for Notre Dame. So if Bryce sticks with LSU, I do not see him going to Michigan. I think that he could potentially, I think he's really looking for a reason to not go to LSU, and that really opens the door for Notre Dame. So a big visit. He almost committed the last time he was on campus before the LSU trip. We'll see if this one's a game changer.
All right, real quick, one big prediction before signing day.
One big prediction. I'm very close. I said it already. I'm really close to putting in a crystal ball pick for Julian Lewis to Colorado. And I don't know when it's going to happen, if he happens to flip down the stretch, but I still, to this day, and I've said it back in February, there's nobody that really feels great about USC keeping him in the class. I think Colorado can get that one done.
That would be huge for Deion Sanders. I mean, we talk about Shedeur Sanders all the time. What's it going to look like? Now you're talking about building for the future behind Shedeur Sanders. My prediction, I think, Bryce Underwood, we'll see what happens there. How about Oregon? I think they got some meat left on the bone here in terms of potentially surging to a top 5 caliber class. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. I think they'll probably finish around 6 or 7, but you always got to be wary of Dan Lanning, who we like to call the Danimal. Guys, like I said, you can find all this great information on the 247 Sports YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe. As always, all of the information that you need recruiting right here at 247 Sports. For Tom Loy, I'm Cooper Patagna. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.